This is a sad story. For a pilot, it's a horrific one. You see, for an airline guy like me, there's something both terrible and comforting when a crash is due to pilot error. Terrible in that lives have been lost, loved ones have been ruined, and all of us have to face up to the bitter end stored up for all humanity. Comforting in the hope that had a similar circumstance occurred to me, I would have avoided the error that plagued the accident pilot and delivered my passengers safely to their family. UPS 2976, the crash in Louisville, Kentucky, is increasingly looking like a horror. Pilots doing their job, destructive failure at the worst possible moment, an aircraft unbeknownst to them that had been rendered unflyable. The exclamation point captured from 3 angles on the modern mismatch of surveillance video and iPhones. 3 innocent crew members dying having done nothing wrong. Innocent bystanders in buildings and parking lots along the extended center line clobbered by the hell of aluminum and blazing Jet A fuel. The worst thing that terrorists ever thought to do was to manipulate the destructive vulnerability of this pinnacle of human endeavor. 60,000 gallons of kerosene traveling at 200 miles an hour turned into the fourth gate of hell. Enough thermal energy and impact force to bring down the towers of Babel. We contain this beast 40 million times per year, the number of large jet operations worldwide. When we fail, it ends in a plume of smoke you can spot from the moon. The NTSB has boots on the ground at the crash site to gather details about what caused the crash in Louisville on November 4th, but already a number of details are coming into focus. While the mainstream media largely chases down fruitless leads, I'm here to separate wheat from chaff and let you know where the investigation is increasingly heading. And listen, we're going to get a lot more precision as the NTSB piles through the associated mountains of paperwork and debris, processed through dozens of different working groups, producing 1,000 pages across 100 different reports, which will, in a month or so, be data dumped into a preliminary docket on the NTSB website. For now, though, with the available evidence, there doesn't appear to be much mystery as to what happened. To get to the root cause, we have to talk about 2 prior aircraft crashes first, both involving the predecessor to the accident aircraft, the MD-11, which was the DC-10. The story of the MD-11 begins decades earlier with Douglas Aircraft's DC-10, an aircraft that entered service in the early 1970s and became one of the most recognizable wide-body tri-jets in aviation. The DC-10 was built for a world where long-range, high-capacity air travel was rapidly expanding. Airlines needed something powerful, efficient, and capable of flying intercontinental routes. The Boeing 747 was the king of size, which was really the only way to make any sense of a 4-engine airliner. Jet engines are generally more efficient the larger they become. Another way of stating that is that each engine adds inefficiency. They require additional weight in pylons and mountings, reinforcements to lasso tens of thousands of pounds of thrust to the airframe, additional fuel hoses and pumps, and hydraulic systems. It's the reason why an early trailblazer in airline travel, the Boeing 707, died an early death. 2 large engines are much more efficient than 4 small ones. It's only when you get to the jumbo jets, the Boeing 747 and the Airbus A380, that 4 versus 2 begins to make economic sense. And the jumbo jets have their own problems. With massive capacity for either passenger seats or cargo, they will saturate all but the largest markets, pricing themselves out of profitability. Per seat mile or per pound, the jumbos are more efficient, but if you can't sell all that capacity, you end up at a loss. And so, for a brief period of time, the tri-jet layout was tried out. It was doomed early for the dustbin. In the case of the DC-10, Douglas Corporation was going for a niche between the capacity of narrow bodies such as the 737 and the jumbos. Cheaper per pound to operate than the narrow bodies and able to cross the Pacific. Right size versus the jumbos for mid-size markets. The development of larger, more efficient turbine engines was soon to produce a revolution though. Turbine engine reliability is extraordinarily high, and extended overwater twin-engine operations were already in their infancy. Even if the DC-10 hadn't had such a poor safety record, its days, like the 707 before it, were already numbered. The dustbin of aviation inevitably connects through freighters, where every outdated aircraft goes to die. The troubled early reputation of the DC-10 accelerated that demise. Soon after production began, in 1972, American Airlines Flight 96 suffered a cargo door failure, which resulted in damage and rapid depressurization. The pilots wrestled the aircraft to a safe landing. 2 years later, the result was tragic. A cargo door failure on Turkish Airlines Flight 981 caused the passenger floor to collapse, which ultimately led to a loss of control. 346 people were killed in the ensuing crash. Eastern Airlines Flight 66 crashed in 1975 while on approach to JFK Airport in New York following a wind-shear encounter. 113 were killed. American Airlines Flight 191 was a straw that broke the camel's back in 1979 when the left pylon separated from the aircraft, ultimately resulting in an uncontrolled roll to the left that left 272 dead. In 7 years of service, over 700 were killed in the DC-10. Despite its troubled early reputation, over time, modifications, operational changes, and design improvements stabilized the DC-10 service record. It ultimately became a workhorse for both passenger and cargo operators, earning a reputation for reliability and range. By the late 1980s, however, the aviation world had changed. Competitors like the Boeing 767 and Airbus A310 were proving that new technology could deliver more capability with fewer engines. McDonnell Douglas faced a decision: design an entirely new aircraft or evolve the one they already had. They chose evolution. The result was the MD-11 introduced in 1990. In many ways, it was a stretched, refined DC-10. The fuselage was lengthened to carry more passengers or cargo. The wings were redesigned and given wing lengths to reduce drag and improve fuel efficiency. The cockpit was updated with a modern glass flight deck, eliminating the need for a flight engineer and reducing crew workload. The engines were newer and more powerful, promising better performance and lower operating costs. On paper, it looked like the natural next step. But the MD-11 inherited not just the strengths of the DC-10, range, cargo capacity, and versatility, it also inherited the challenges of pushing a tri-jet design to its limits. The longer fuselage and aerodynamic tweaks shifted the aircraft's center of gravity rearward, giving the MD-11 a more sensitive pitch response. Small control inputs produced larger than expected changes in attitude. And although computers aided the controls, the aircraft's handling margins were less forgiving, especially in critical phases of flight like takeoff and landing. Meanwhile, the world around it was changing again. New generation twin-engine aircraft such as the Boeing 777 and the Airbus A330 began offering the same, or greater, range and capacity, but with lower fuel burn and cheaper maintenance. Like an aging Playboy Playmate, MD-11 figures began to sag. Newer models were more desirable. The only option left? Slinging bits and bobs and cargo pallets as a freighter, where its portly volume, range, and payload made it nearly perfect for freight operations, and companies like FedEx and UPS kept the MD-11 flying long after passenger airlines moved on. Today, the MD-11 stands as a final chapter in McDonnell Douglas's storied lineage of wide-body aircraft, a bridge between the classic mechanical era of the DC-10 and the digital age that followed. A design both admired and scrutinized, a machine shaped by progress, compromise, innovation, and the shifting demands of aviation itself. There was another high-profile DC-10 crash in 1988, an event that intermixed tragedy with triumph.
Situation out there. Well, the plane is completely demolished on the ground. 10-4, you're going to need a lot of additional assistance out there, it sounds like.
United Airlines Flight 232 suffered an uncontained engine failure in its tail-mounted number 2 engine. And this is where you must pay attention. This Venn diagram overlapping the fates of the MD-11 to the DC-10. Modern turbofans incorporate 2 separate sections. The fan section is the part that you can see while standing in front of the aircraft. For the past half-decade, civil aircraft manufacturers have preferred high-bypass fans in which 80 to 90% of engine thrust is produced by the cold air fan, not the high-temperature thrust coming from the compressor section. High-bypass fans operate more like a propeller than a jet. Power production is created thermally in the compressor core, but is mostly transferred via low-pressure turbines to the fan. The core of the engine is nothing more than a very, very large, very expensive air compressor. 500 knots of ground speed is only affordable in the thin air found above Mount Everest. To create enough thrust to keep a 500,000-pound aircraft aloft, that thin air is sucked in by a dozen relatively small compressor discs spinning at a high rate of speed. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow is a euphemism for how the whole thing works. Suck air in, squeeze it, spray jet fuel into the flame, and blow it out the ass end. In high bypass turbine engines, high energy air is routed across a low pressure turbine, which is connected through a shaft to the large fan blades in the front of the engine. It's very efficient, yet there's great danger in those large fan blades. You see, they also spin very fast. The centrifugal loads are tremendous. You're betting your life on the blades holding together, because if even one separates, it'll result in catastrophe. That's what happened on United 232, and based on initial evidence, it's a good bet that's what happened on UPS 2976. Even when a small section of a fan blade detaches, it produces a large rotational imbalance around the fan shaft. This will eventually turn the fan section into a grenade. The explosive charge, the massive unbalanced vibrations, the shrapnel, the destruction from the remaining fan blades. On United 232, investigators eventually traced the initial failure to a tiny inclusion in one of the titanium fan discs, which slowly developed into a fatigue crack. Once the disc fractured in flight, the engine disintegrated explosively. Shrapnel from the explosion ruptured all 3 hydraulic lines in the tail of the aircraft. The air loads required to maneuver a 500,000-pound airliner are massive. Without hydraulic assistance, the crew was unable to control the aircraft traditionally.
Radar contact.
Okay, so you know we have almost no controllability. Very little elevator and almost no aileron. We're controlling the turns by power.
United 232 Heavy, understand, sir. You can only make right turns?
That's affirmative.
All that remained was differential thrust to awkwardly turn the aircraft and dynamic stability to keep it from falling out of the sky. Neither method is remotely precise, yet the crew managed to make the runway in Sioux Falls, Iowa.
United 232 Heavy, roger, sir. Yeah, that's a closed runway. That'll work, sir. We're getting the equipment off the runway, and they'll line up for that one.
How long is it?
6,600 feet, 6,600, and the equipment's coming off. At the end of the runway, it's just a wide open field, so the length won't be a problem.
Okay.
The Hart landing claimed 111 lives, with the heroic actions of the flight crew preserving 185. Back to the UPS crash. Here is NTSB spokesman Todd Inman describing the debris field around the runways at Louisville Airport.
Yesterday, we also did what was called a FOD walk. This is a foreign object debris. This FOD walk occurred on runways 17 left, or L, and 17 right, or R. During the FOD walk on 17R, we found multiple pieces of engine fan blades, along with the main component of the number 1 engine, which is on the left side of the aircraft.
Note that Todd's description of the fan blades indicates that they had fragmented into several smaller pieces. This is backed up by aerial images, which also suggests that the cowling was subjected to a significant explosive discharge consistent with the high-speed fragmentation of the fan blades. This fragmentation may have also fractured fuel lines to the engine. One of the many purposes of the engine cowling is to contain fire should it occur, allowing for fire extinguishing within its confines. With cowling destroyed, the fire could freely burn. It appears that the fire was solely caused by fuel escaping from the engine itself. We can see in this video and image stills that once the engine separated from the wing, the fire is no longer visible. As remarkable and destructive as the failure was, had it occurred on a twin jet, which by regulation is capable of safely climbing on a single engine for a return to land, the tragedy would have almost certainly been averted. It is a testament to the design of commercial aircraft that they could experience such a destructive event and still function. But that's not what happened here. And the reason why is wrapped up in the tri-engine design of the MD-11. There's only one way to make 3 engines work on an aircraft, and that's to mount one on the tail. The danger of the tail-mounted engine is twofold. As demonstrated by the United 232 crash, while hydraulic systems are segmented to ensure that at least some flight control surfaces function following a malfunction, there is one location on the aircraft where all 3 hydraulic system lines meet, and that is the tail, where the rudder and elevators are located. To solve the risk to flight controllability created by grenading a number 2 engine, regulators borrowed from the military, which has a long history with aircraft battle damage. Following the United 232 accident, hydraulic fuses were required to be installed in commercial aircraft, which would sense a hydraulic leak in the tail and block hydraulic flow, preventing the total loss of hydraulic fluid. The second risk, remarkably, remained dormant for 50 years. When the fan blades of a wing-mounted engine separates, they will follow the laws of centrifugal force and explode in a circle. This will damage the fuselage and also, critically, spray shrapnel into the path of the tail-mounted engine. The damage produced when this debris is ingested can either cause the engine to fail or severely reduce available thrust. Either way, a heavy MD-11 does not have enough thrust with only one engine to climb, nor even to maintain altitude if the engine failures occur during cruise. A couple of words on another DC-10 crash, the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history, American Airlines Flight 191. There has been much hand-wringing over the similarities to the UPS crash. Both aircraft experienced a separation of the number one engine during the initial phases of flight. Both aircraft rolled to the left prior to crashing. Both occurred on similar variants of aircraft with tri-mounted engines. There are a couple of important differences to note as well. American Airlines Flight 191 didn't experience a fire either before or after engine separation. The uncontrollable left turn for American Airlines was a result of poor systems designed by Douglas. The slats on the front of the wings are extended for takeoff and landing to make the wing capable of flying at slow speeds. They are extended by hydraulic pressure. Most aircraft with a similar configuration incorporate a mechanical lock which keeps the slats in the extended configuration in the event of a loss of hydraulic pressure. The DC-10, as originally designed, did not do that. When the number one engine separated from the aircraft, the number one hydraulic system experienced a sharp drop in pressure. The left wing is supplied hydraulics from the left engine, while the right is supplied from the right engine. The left slats without hydraulic pressure were forced into the retracted position by air loads on the leading edge of the wing. This substantially increased the stalling speed of the wing, which is the speed at which a wing aggressively begins to lose lift. The takeoff safety speed following an engine failure was slower than the stalling speed of the left wing with the slaps retracted. The flight director and pilot training commanded the crew to pitch up to obtain this takeoff safety speed, which resulted in substantial asymmetric lift, the right wing with its slats extended producing lift, the left wing not. This resulted in roll forces that the ailerons did not have the command authority to control. The aircraft went inverted and crashed into a trailer park. On American Airlines 191, it was discovered that not only did the engine separate, but also the entire pylon, which connects the engine to the wing. There are a few bolts that secure the pylon to the wing. Large transport category aircraft are required to accomplish heavy maintenance checks at specified time intervals. One of these checks involves the removal of engines from the airframe. It turns out that disconnecting 4 bolts from the pylon is much more efficient than disconnecting the mounts between the engine and the pylon. 200 hours more efficient to be specific. U.S. operators had sorted out that removing the entire engine pylon structure gave them a cost advantage. United, Continental, and American Airlines all used a shortcut. However, this process increased the risk of damage to the pylon bolts as the engine had to be supported very precisely during removal and installation. Needless to say, this procedure is no longer allowed, and so should not be a factor in the separation of the number one engine on UPS 2976.
You revealed in the news conference today that you're actually sending NTSB investigators to San Antonio. We've been doing a lot of reporting here on the San Antonio maintenance that was done there. The plane was there for about a month. Is this a sign to us that you are now really zeroing in on why it was there for 1 month and what was done to it before it was here in Louisville?
No, it is not a sign of that. It's a sign of this is another area of focus. And so one of the things we're careful on is to say just because we're doing something doesn't mean that's where we think it is.
Here's Todd Inman describing another difference between the two crashes.
And we have viewed airport CCTV security coverage, which shows the left engine detaching from the wing during the takeoff roll.
The video Todd refers to is apparently not available publicly. Most likely, it's high-definition airport surveillance video which depicts the engine separating. But he was clear that this occurred immediately following liftoff, well after the flames and fire had began. There is one other similarity between the two crashes, and it is a massive one. According to Todd,
additionally, in regard to the plane itself, the bulk of the left engine pylon was still attached to the left engine when the engine separated from the wing.
this suggests that, similar to the American Airlines DC-10 accident 46 years ago, the engine separated after a failure of the pylon-to-wing mounting structure. While this is an unusual and dramatic event, it may not be central to the cause of the crash. The primary causal sequence appears to involve the successive failure of 2 of the 3 engines. The number 1 engine due to fan disc separation, followed by the number 2 engine, which failed after ingesting debris from the number 1 engine's breakup. The separation of the pylon and engine, if anything, reduced weight and drag and reduced the intensity of the fire, but with only 1 engine, there was still not nearly enough thrust to wrestle the beast more than 100 feet into the air. The similarities are striking, but the causes are almost definitely different. Likely, the massive shrapnel from the fan blades disintegrating resulted in damage to the engine pylon mountings, which was aggravated by high temperatures in the fire that followed. The result was a separation of the number 1 engine during rotation. There was no surviving this. Nothing the pilots could have done. The speed tracing from the NTSB data depicts a smooth acceleration to a normal rotation speed, which would have been 10 to 15 knots above the go-no-go decision speed of around 160 to 170 knots. Above that speed, pilots are rigorously trained to take the emergency into flight. The only caveat is if they do not believe the aircraft can be controlled, they can reject above this V1 speed, understanding that the most likely consequence is a runway overrun. Given the result here, it's easy to mistake that such an overrun would have been preferable, yet this fails to take account of the shock, surprise, and confusion the event would have produced. If they had been superhuman, the pilots may have figured out how dire the circumstance was within 2 to 3 seconds. At 180 knots, that's 911 feet. At the end of the runway, that's the difference between a slow speed overrun and going off at 100 knots. For this reason, pilots will always be sprung loaded to go flying without sufficient reason to reject prior to accelerating above V1. If I'd been flying that plane, I'd be dead. So would Chuck Yeager or Bob Hoover or Neil Armstrong or any other legend of aviation excellence. It's a hard pill to swallow for a Type A aviator. We all ultimately end up in the same place. Click the thumbnail on the screen for coverage as to what many people have experienced during the final moments prior to clinical death. Just like life, the story is full of equal parts hope and fear. Until next time, God bless and stay safe.